Today is October 30th. It's the 304th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. Today is the day before Halloween. And across the U.S. and Canada, the night before Halloween is known as Mischief Night, a night of pranks and minor bits of vandalism inflicted upon a neighborhood at the hands of its young folks, egging houses, TPing trees, soaping windows, and smashing jack-o'-lanterns. All the things that, when they grow up and own a home of their own, they'll regret they ever did as a youth. Basically, getting all the tricks out of the way so they can focus on getting treats the next night. There are actually a bunch of different names for the night across the U.S. Where I grew up, we called it Beggars Night, because the kids that roamed the neighborhood just wanted an advance on the next night's candy. In other parts of the Northeast, they have Cabbage Night, where they leave rotting cabbages on doorsteps. In the Midwest, they call it Gate Night, because they open farmers' gates and let livestock roam free. In parts of Canada, it's Mat Night, because they steal or switch people's doormats. How do they ever think of these names? In Michigan in the 1970s and 80s, they have Devil's Night, where they just take the whole prank thing a bit too far by setting the place on fire. In 1984, there are 800 separate fires set in Detroit. Since then, Detroit has made a conscious effort to change Devil's Night to Angel's Night, with thousands upon thousands of volunteers patrolling the streets at night and a curfew from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for all unaccompanied minors. Anyone under the age of 18 out on the streets of Detroit without an adult will be arrested. It's all good, clean fun until they resort to arson. On this day in 1938, listeners of the CBS radio network are enjoying a performance by Ramon Raquello and his orchestra when the broadcast is suddenly interrupted by a news flash.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
Listeners who have missed the show's introduction at the top of the hour are unaware that they are actually listening to an episode of the anthology radio drama series, The Mercury Theater on the Air. And this evening's production is an adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel, The War of the Worlds, produced for the airwaves by John Houseman and Orson Welles. For the first half hour, the regularly scheduled programming, and I'm doing the air quotes, is periodically interrupted by news bulletins, and then the second half is dedicated fully to live stand-ups by reporters, allegedly calling in from various parts of New York and New Jersey, describing the terror and devastation of the Martian invasion. The calamity and catastrophe culminates with the last standing reporter calling in a report.
Martian cylinders are falling all over the country. One outside of Buffalo, one in Chicago, St. Louis. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running toward the East River, thousands of them, dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue. 5th Avenue. 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
And then a lone ham radio operator calls out.
2X2L calling CQ, New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone?
The silence is followed by a monologue by a professor recounting his experience during the invasion, and then a word from Orson Welles. Orson Welles is inspired to pull the Halloween hoax after hearing a 1926 British radio broadcast that is similar in nature. Welles says, quote, "I got the idea from a BBC show when a Catholic priest told how some communists had seized London and a lot of people in London believed it. And I thought, that'd be fun to do on a big scale. Let's have it from outer space." The priest is Father Ronald Knox, who writes mysteries and thrillers in his spare time. And the fictitious news broadcast he writes that airs on the BBC 12 years earlier has Londoners believing the Bolsheviks have burnt down Parliament and blown up Big Ben. Legend has it that all of America is fooled into believing the Martians are invading when the War of the Worlds is broadcast on this day in 1938. But the truth is, there aren't that many people listening. Sure, a couple 100,000 tune in to some or all of the show, but it's estimated that those listening make up only 2% of the overall radio listening audience on this night. CBS receives a lot of calls and about 2,000 letters from angry listeners who complain about the hoax once they learn they've been duped. But after this night's broadcast, there are over 12,000 news stories written about the hoax and the alleged panic caused by it. News of the hoax brings 23-year-old Orson Welles international notoriety. The next year, he signs a deal with RKO Pictures in Hollywood, a deal that is unheard of at the time and unheard of even now. Welles signs a 2-picture deal and is given final cut, total creative control, and he's never made a movie before. His first film for RKO is Citizen Kane, which he writes, produces, directs, and stars in. It garners a lukewarm response when it's released, but over time, it comes to be accepted as one of the greatest films ever made. Citizen Kane is released only 2.5 years after Orson Welles scares the nation with his radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds. Though he goes on to make 12 more feature films and becomes one of the most critically acclaimed directors in Hollywood history, this 2.5-year period in his life is arguably the pinnacle of his success. The time between his first and greatest film, Citizen Kane, and the legend of the panic that never was that precedes it, the broadcast of the War of the Worlds, on this day in 1938.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
There are 62 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks for sharing the show everywhere you go. Thank you for all the retweets. Thank you for the reviews on iTunes. I love those. Keep those coming. And if you're still listening, oh wait, this just in. Word just coming in now. The Jupiterians are invading. All right, run for cover, people. I might talk to you tomorrow. We'll see.